PR Connections Radio presents. This episode of the PR Connections podcast is brought to you by Classy Communications PR and Advertising. Classy Communications provides public relations and marketing solutions for businesses, professionals, and nonprofit organizations. They can deliver the true meaning of your business with press releases, social media marketing, web development, email marketing, book publishing, and much more. Wherever your potential clients are, they can help you connect with them. Visit classycommunications.net to learn more about their suite of services that can help your business stand out from the rest. Classy Communications is your solution for business success.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PR Connections Radio Show here at prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media. My name is Guy Dawson, and I am your host. And today is a monumental day in the history of America and really the world, in that it is the 49th anniversary of the publishing of the epic novel Roots, which is a phenomenal story that has had, as I mentioned before, a worldwide impact. And I have the absolute privilege of being able to interview one of Alex Haley's. By the way, Alex Haley is the author of Roots. His grandson is here today, and he's going to talk about the legacy of Roots and what it's like to have Alex Haley as a grandfather and so much more. Thank you so much, Bill, for being a part of the PR Connections radio show today and to being a part of this celebration, the 49th year. It's just amazing that it has passed so quickly. I remember, I was very young at the time, but I do remember at least the miniseries, maybe not the book, but I have a really, really clear memory, definitely, of the miniseries. And so welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Guy. Thank you for having me. And yes, 49 years ago, I was quite young myself. So it's kind of amazing to think just how many years have passed and how Roots has permeated culture, the world, and society. It's really hard to believe, but I'm so excited that we are able to celebrate that it is still a relevant book, and with the miniseries and everything, that it still continues to be on top of mind for people. So I'm so excited to be here and have a great conversation with you.
Yeah, Bill. And part of the tagline for the book is it's a saga of an American family. And that's why I thought it was so relevant to have you come on to talk about your lineage. And again, family is such a part of our existence as human beings. We're raised, we're nurtured by our families, and there are a few movies that I can remember over the course of my life that I've seen, Bill, that more exemplify the importance of family than Roots. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. I would, and it's really kind of interesting. I mean, I think I remember back, when Roots was being filmed, I didn't really have a sense of the scope and how monumental and large it is. I mean, I just recall, and I think when Roots was broadcast, I was around 12 years old. And I remember in that, in the year and the periods leading up to that, my father would just simply say, to me something like, oh, well, your grandfather is working on a movie or a film about the family. And I was like, oh, okay. It was like, so, matter of fact. And and I remember, interestingly enough, the day that Roots was, the first episode was broadcast. It was, January 23rd, 1977. It just so happened to be a day in New York when my grandfather was speaking at the Harlem State Office building. It was one of his book signings. It was sort of a celebration. I had not really been to one of his book signings before. And I just remember that there was a room full of people. There were, I would assume at the time in New York, local politicians, my family, some celebrities, all these sorts of things. So it was really kind of a big surprise. I mean, I just couldn't believe just, how many people were there for the book. And it coincidentally also happened to be the very day that my grandfather signed my own personal copy of Roots to me, which, which is significant to me because it was actually, I got my copy on the very day that the first episode of Roots was broadcast. But again, I had no idea about the scope of it. And it was like, my life was like one day, and then after the first episode, everything completely flipped. And my life was never the same after that in terms of, school and everything else.
Right. That's what I wanted to ask you. What was it like being Alex Haley's grandson during that period after Roots had been, the publishing of the book and then the miniseries? I mean, what type of experience was that, being a young man and people knowing your grandfather and knowing that, I could imagine that was an interesting experience.
It was. So I remember over the period of those first 8 episodes, I mean, some people had an idea, of course, to some degree, who my grandfather was, a little bit because of his previous work with, the autobiography of Malcolm X and things of that nature. But with Roots, it flipped a switch. Like, I was in elementary school. I think I was in the 6th grade, 5th or I think I was in the 6th grade or something at that time. And I was just everybody's, Bill, my friend, so, blah, blah, blah. And then after the first episode of Roots, it was just like, a hailstorm. I mean, I was getting all these questions, about who this Kunta Kinte was, and did I know Kizzy? And they, there was lots of conversation, about Roots and the talking of the episodes each night, and lots of excitement from my friends and other students, and also lots of excitement from my teachers at the time. And I guess if I could say, if there was, at least from a kid's perspective, a downside all of a sudden, I think that all of a sudden my teachers, they all had heightened expectations of me academically. So it just seemed that the grading got a little bit harder, and the expectations became a little bit higher. But it was really interesting in that I guess I had never had this perspective of understanding what it was like maybe to be a kin of someone who is famous, right? Because people do things inadvertently that we often don't think about. So to my friends, parents and family members, I was known as Bill Haley, right? So I found that after Roots, or as Roots was going on, I became not so much Bill Haley, but I became Alex Haley's grandson. Like, that was literally the way that people were introducing me. Or it would be, I could be somewhere completely innocuous and out of the blue, and someone would just literally blurt out, who I was related to. And it was just so different and strange to me at the time. And there was a period really where I kind of had to feel like I was proud of knowing and seeing how my family history was depicted on screen and in the book. But there was a period where I kind of had to fight to reestablish my own identity, because I was being known as being related to somebody, as opposed to the Bill Haley that everybody knew. So there were ups and downs of it, but overall I will say that it was it was a fantastic experience, and being able to grow up during that period and be exposed to so many things and realizing the significance of Roots. Like, one of the things that stick in my mind is that, when you walk into someone's house, I mean, typically, one of the books or something you see on their bookshelf, you're going to see the Bible, right? You're going to see it in the bookshelf. You're going to see it perhaps on the coffee table or in the house somewhere. And I actually lost count over the years, how many times I'd walk into a friend's house or someone's house, and literally there'd be a copy of Roots either on the coffee table or on the bookshelf. So it gave me a sense of just about how widespread and popular, Roots was. And it just was astounding to me that this book that had a history or a story, a historical narrative of my family, was on someone's bookshelf or was on somebody's coffee table.
Yeah, that definitely has to be a unique feeling. Not only that, again, the impact of the fact that your grandfather wrote it, but just to know that that's a part of your
Yes.
actual family history, and that millions and millions and millions of people all over the world have learned about your family history through the portrayal, both in the book and in the miniseries. Boy, that I would imagine that that's a unique perspective, right? That I hadn't even thought about until we're having this conversation here. Well, people haven't looked at my family to that degree, the way that they have looked
Right.
and studied your family.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite amazing in a sense, but it also opened up the door for me to have conversations with a lot of my friends and other people. So, they may talk about my family and say, oh, they'll talk about, Chicken George and where he was from in that part of Tennessee. And, it allowed me to have conversations with them. Well, what part of where's your family from? Where do they settle? It might've been North Carolina, might've been Georgia, might've been South Carolina. And it started, and I would hear lots of stories from my friends and their family about where they came from. Or, in other cases, a lot of, growing up in New York, a lot of my friends there, they may have been, they themselves may have been first generation in the U.S., but their parents, grew up in the Caribbean. They may have come from Jamaica. They may have come from Barbados or the Bahamas or the Virgin Islands or somewhere like that, or Puerto Rico or any of those places. So it's sort of looking at, the history when they started to tell me their stories about where their family was from, and always, and then having me be able to realize that, okay, their family was from Jamaica, the Barbados or Bahamas or any of these places, but also the ancestors before them, typically at least somebody came from the African continent. And that was like kind of the roots connection. So it expanded my vision, actually, of thinking about how large our African diaspora is. Even though I know Roots focused on, that sort of transatlantic slave trail from the Gambia to Annapolis, Maryland, and focused on the continental U.S., talking with my other friends made me realize the diaspora is so widespread. And I started to think more about how globally large, the African influence is across the entire planet, and what we've contributed to the world in terms of culture, society, custom, food, and our journey. And that's just a fascinating thing to explore. And it's going to be a great thing to kind of re-explore and re-examine, as we, look at now the publishing of Roots 49 years ago, and as we, enter into the 50th year next year.
Yes, and earlier, Bill, you touched on the cultural significance of Roots and the impact that it had and the types of conversations I think that Roots created around slavery and genealogy and American history. What was it like, or what has it been like for you over this span of your life? Because a large portion of your life now, you've been a part of this this epic tale and its impact. I could imagine you've had some interesting conversations with people, right, about what Roots represents on so many levels.
I have. I've talked to people on all sides of, the equation, so to speak, in terms of where they've come from. I mean, so I've had conversations where people are talking, whether they're, Black or white, where they came from. I've had, some of my friends, like I said, I grew up in New York, and, I have friends from, every ethnic background. And it was nice to be able to talk to friends, and they would be proud to talk about, their Italian heritage, for instance, and in the kind of looking back when they talk to their parents and how their grandparents or their great grandparents, came over from Italy and Ellis Island and things of that nature. And in the early period, we heard, it was lots of that, like people talking about what they heard from their parents, right? So that was very popular. And then how their parents were motivated to go ask their parents or their grandparents about where they came from, which is the very thing that my grandfather, people in your family, find out more about what and where they came from, because they're like depositories. They're librarians of your history, and get everything you can from them while they are still alive. And I've always been fascinated by that aspect of roots, the oral history, the transmission of knowledge and history. Because if it wasn't really for that, if Kunta Kinte was not convicted enough in who he was and his desire to make sure that his offspring and his family knew exactly where he came from, roots would not exist in the way that it would not exist, period. And it's remarkable to me that he was so convicted that he was able to pass down the strength of his oral history, where he came from, and it was able to go down 7 generations to my grandfather, and then through him to me, where I am, the 9th generation, and my children are the 10th. So that's one aspect of it. And then, obviously, with the popularity of roots, I believe it single-handedly, exploded the entire field of genealogy, where I almost would say that roots served as an accelerant in terms of where genealogy stands today in the 21st century. And, it was during that time, it was a pretty, sort of sleepy corner of the world in terms of perhaps academia, or it was in, the Mormon church and other churches and things like that, where people were all of a sudden in archives, they were in libraries, and they were in things like that. And so it sparked enough of an interest. And with technology, with the fact that you have DNA now, where people have a very, more simple and easier way to find out where they came from by literally looking, in their blood or their spit, or however you want to say it. We've always said, my grandfather would say, our roots, and my father would say, our roots are in our bones. Well, they are. We can all of a sudden now know very easily the places that we came from. And then, of course, with the advent of technology, the records that are easily accessible for places like slave voyages. You can find, records of slave ships. And I often think that's remarkable at how many things we have at our fingertips these days, where I kind of makes me think about how my grandfather would talk about, how he found the record for the Lord Ligonier after, being in a room full of slave ship records. And after, I think he said something like 7 weeks, and I think it was like the 1023rd record in a file he was looking at. He kind of saw the line, I think it was line number 18, that kind of had this Lord Ligonier thing, and the line, and then, the departure point from the Gambia. And I think that, he was, when I said he had a generational assignment, it was really everything that happened before then that allowed that to happen, because I don't believe, had he not had a career in the Coast Guard, he would not have had the expertise to understand ship records and logs and all the things that was able to ultimately connect him to the ship in which Kunta Kinte came from. So I think when we look at from where his journey started and where we are in the 21st century, that's probably the biggest legacy of roots, in the fact that being able to discover our genealogical history in a variety of forms is now easier than ever. And I don't think that it would have accelerated as quickly as it has if it were not for roots.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bill. I think that the roots was definitely a catalyst for the growth of the genealogy industry, no doubt about that. Well, one thing, obviously your grandfather is best known for being the author of Roots. However, he was a very accomplished writer before he ever even wrote Roots. And a lot of people out there may not realize the fact that he wrote, number one, I mean, lots of articles for publications, and he was well known for that, but also the Autobiography of Malcolm X, which is a best-selling book that's also extremely impactful.
Yes.
Would you like to speak to some of the other writing that your father did before he even wrote Roots, or your grandfather, excuse me, before he even wrote Roots?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, Roots was so monumental and so phenomenal that that part of his writer's life or his creative life is often not as prominent. I mean, the autobiography is, yes, but I would say that that aspect of his life is actually some of the parts that I enjoy and take the most joy and pride in. So when I look at the fact that, you know, I would say that, you know, he taught himself to write. And I would say that I think he was actually more of he always was more of a natural storyteller. That his supreme talent was the ability to tell stories and to speak. I think that was his number one singular talent. It was the thing that was most natural to him. And I believe just by virtue of how he was raised, the writing developed. And, you know, his family, you know, with my great-grandfather being a professor, agriculture, right? And his mother being a teacher. You know, he was raised in a very educational environment. And with his brothers, when my great-grandmother Bertha passed away, you know, the boys were, after she passed away, they were kind of split up for a little bit. And that kind of generated the ability to communicate by writing. That was the best way to write. So he grew up writing his brothers and family members from early age. And that transferred when he was in the Coast Guard, where he was writing, and that's what he was used to doing. And, you know, he literally would write as many and receive as many as 40 letters a week. Right. And, you know, and that led to the obvious bug of his writing where, you know, there was often the story where he wrote so much, and he was during World War II, was in the South Pacific, and his fellow seamates asked him to begin writing love letters to the ladies that they were seeing on, you know, at various ports. And he had a little kind of, you know, side hustle with that. Right. But then I think that sparked his interest to actually begin writing articles. And, you know, I'm proud of the fact that, you know, he wrote in the Coast Guard, and he learned how to write, and he learned how to edit, and he wrote for several of the Coast Guard's newsletters, newspapers. And, you know, one of the things that people don't necessarily realize is that he was actually the Coast Guard's very first chief journalist. The position had never been created before, until he was essentially given that particular ranking by the Coast Guard because of his work in journalism. So I'm most proud of that. And also his journalistic career, the writing in Reader's Digest. He's written wonderful articles for Reader's Digest, and also with Playboy, the fascinating story with Playboy. You know, he was writing in the turbulent 60s. I mean, he iconically interviewed some of the most now today well-known people. When we think about, you know, obviously Malcolm X, but there was Miles Davis, there was Muhammad Ali, then known as Cassius Clay. There was Sammy Davis Jr. There was you know, the Nazi lover guy, George Lincoln Rockwell. There were so many, Jim Brown. There were so many of these cultural icons that he was able to interview, that I'm actually fascinated by his interviews. And I actually enjoy reading those pieces the most. And, you know, people often don't necessarily realize that the very format for the Playboy interviews was one that he actually created. However, inadvertently, and the backstory of that is he was doing a very first article, an essay assignment for Miles Davis. And Miles Davis, a great trumpeter, jazz person, for those who know of him, was not a man of many words. And I think he had something like a 5,000 word essay he needed to turn into Playboy. And he was panicking because Miles had not given him enough material. And so he literally just took the framework of the interview, the questions, and framed them into a long form interview, submitted it to Playboy. He thought, okay, this is the end of the road for me. They're going to fire me, right? They're never going to use me again. And Hugh Hefner and the Playboy editorial staff loved it. And he literally iconically created the very same long form Playboy interview that you might, I mean, I know the magazine is not published, I don't think in print so much anymore, but that long form interview format that had been published for years was actually started by him. And it's one of the things I'm most proud about his journalistic career.
And earlier, Bill, we had talked about the celebration that's coming up, the 50-year anniversary of the publishing of the book, as well as the miniseries. Yes. And tell me what is the significance. I mean, obviously, you've talked a lot about legacy, the impact of Roots on your life and on the lives of so many people. But with us celebrating 50 years, what's that going to be like for you? And how are you going to engage in this celebration? I mean, people all over the world, I think, are really looking forward to circling back to Roots. They remember it. They know the significance of it. They can see little bits and pieces. It's become, again, a part of the world culture. I hear phrases related to Roots all the time, Bill, and it just is like, wow, it makes me, so it's always on people's minds to an extent. But with this 50-year anniversary, boy, we are really going to be reliving the significance of Roots. What's that going to be like for you?
Well, I mean, you actually brought up a really good point, Guy. I think the 50th anniversary of Roots is a perfect opportunity to reintroduce Roots to a whole new generation of people. So, for instance, it's almost like, if I could use a metaphor, you watch baseball and there's home plate, and and the umpire kind of brushes the plate off, right? So they could see the corners. And I think with Roots, because of the time that's gone by, it's entered culture in various ways, shapes, or forms. So that the 50th anniversary is a great time to reintroduce people to the Roots, the book, right? There are lots of people that I've talked to. Many people have seen, if I go back, not the current generation, but even the generation before, a lot of people have seen their introduction to Roots has been was really the miniseries, right? That was their first introduction to Roots. You'll find that a lot of people do have the book. Maybe their parents or grandparents have the book on their shelves or had it on the coffee table. This is a perfect opportunity to kind of reintroduce. So my intent as we celebrate the 50th is to reintroduce Roots, the book, right? To encourage people to read the book and talk about the book and introduce the work that my grandfather spent 3 years researching and over a 9 years researching and over a 3-year period completing the writing of. And actually, it's really nice that, one of the things he did, he dedicated the book to this country. He dedicated it as a birthday present because it was also 1976. We were celebrating the 200th anniversary of the founding of this very country. And now we are about to celebrate in the same year, the 250th anniversary of the country. So it's a great opportunity to unwrap the birthday gift that he wrote again and to expose new generations to Roots, and then use that as a vehicle to begin having those conversations about our history, about the transatlantic slave trade, about slavery, about people. And I know it's a fraught time in this country. There's lots of division and divisiveness in this country. But one of the great things about Roots is it's kind of having people look back a little bit into the time capsule, because essentially Roots was printed it was printed in 35 different languages. So it had global appeal and kind of reminding that although Roots covered, a story of my family in which enslavement and the period of slavery was involved. At the end of the day, it was really about families and our history and our perseverance through hard times and triumphs and our ability to continue to move forward. That's a common theme. So I'd love to be able to use Roots as a vehicle through reading it and having discussions to allow people to begin having those conversations, turning the temperature down and having that, conversations. Some aspects of it may be uncomfortable, but life can be uncomfortable. It doesn't mean it has to be hostile, right? It gives us an opportunity to re-engage and have those conversations. And in watching, and also encouraging people to watch the original miniseries, because at the time, you could say that, essentially, literally almost every Black actor in Hollywood was in the miniseries Roots, as well as every well-known famous white actor. You had essentially, you would almost could say the whole of well-known Hollywood had a role in that miniseries, right? Now, why did that happen? It happened because they were moved and compelled by the story. Actors can choose, particularly if you're not, Black actors obviously would want to get work wherever they can, right? But you had a lot of well-known actors that could have chosen to do anything else, but they were so moved by the story and by what it meant that they wanted to be a part of it. And that's the energy I would love to bring back and celebrate and remind and show the newer generations, the two generations that have happened since Roots, what the original was, right? And even, it also allows us to, a lot of them may be more familiar with the version that came out in 2016, but it's a great opportunity to re-engage them on both the miniseries, but really the book. I want them to read it and to really kind of absorb it on a deeper level.
Yes, again, the excitement behind this 50-year anniversary, as you had mentioned, Bill, that's also in alignment with the 250-year anniversary of the founding of the United States. It's just going to be just such a huge year next year. And you have this platform that you are developing called the Inherited Roots Project. Would you like to share with the audience what that's all about?
Sure. Thank you, Guy. I appreciate that. So the Inherited Roots Project, it's actually a foundation, a nonprofit foundation that I formed with Malik Manga, who is my fellow partner, my brother and co-founder. And to give you a little bit of backstory, my grandfather knew a lot about roots in terms of obviously the U.S. side of things. He was able to discover, obviously, that his ancestor came from, the West Africa and more likely the Gambia. One of the things we did not know precisely in the oral family history was the meanings of some of these African words that have been passed down. So, interestingly enough, my grandfather, doing an assignment for Playboy, actually, he was in London. He was there to interview a actress by the name of Julie Christie, and he didn't get a chance to connect with her. He went to the British Museum, saw the Rosetta Stone, and the idea clicked in his head that if he could find what these African words meant, that he could perhaps find not only necessarily the country and the area where our ancestor, the African, was from, but perhaps the very place he was from. So he sought out at the UN and other places someone who would be able to decipher those words. And to make a long story short, he also taught at Hamilton College in upstate New York for a period, and he was able to get connected with an African student by the name of Ibu Manga, who was from the Gambia and actually knew exactly the African words and the translation. And he was able to connect him where he literally, that's when he took his first trip back to the Gambia. Ibu's family was very well known in the Gambia. His uncles and his parents, they had connections. They were surveyors. They knew all about the Gambia. My grandfather told them the story. And to make a long story short, Ibu was critical and actually was my grandfather's lifelong friend and was the last mile that connected us with our African history to the village of Jufuray, the discovery of our ancestors' oral history, and the fact that this Kente person we had heard was Kunta Kinte, and it aligned with their oral history, aligned with the oral history that had been passed down over 200 years after that. So he was the connection for that last mile. And so with the Inherited Roots Project, we're celebrating that, and we're celebrating bringing people. We want to bring the diaspora back to the Gambia, because when Roots came out, there was a widespread desire to go to the Gambia, where literally the Gambia couldn't handle it. But they have needs. We want to promote the cultural tourism there. We want to promote the things that the Gambia needs. They need, resources like ability to have clean water all over the place. They have plenty of water. It's not always clean, but filtering water. They need, some sort of healthcare thing, agricultural practices. Those are initiatives that we are working on bringing back to the Gambia. So just as we got a gift, my grandfather, my family, and the world got a gift from the homeland of Kunta Kinte, in the village of Jufuray, the Inherited Roots Project is really kind of talking about the return and also the giving back to the places where, we came from, not only in the Gambia, but back to the motherland, providing the resources and things like that. You see efforts like that in the Ghana and other places, but we want to make sure we're focusing resources and bringing the diaspora back to the places where their ancestors came from. And that's kind of the overarching purpose of the Inherited Roots Project.
Yeah, I wish you nothing but success with your project, Bill. And I think it also shows really the scale of what Roots represents and how much ground there is to cover when you celebrate everything that your grandfather put into developing one of the most important books probably in the history of definitely of America, if not of the entire world. And so I, along with you, I'm just so excited to be a part of the celebration in 2026 that's going to be coming up, the 50-year anniversary of the publishing of the book. And of course, in 1977, the celebration of the miniseries, which, as you mentioned, yes, featured some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. It's just when you actually watch the miniseries again, as I have a couple of years ago, I watched it and I just did not realize how many huge stars were a part of it. And so just going to be enjoying the celebration. And for those out there who'd like to learn more about your platform, Bill, and how they can become involved in it, learn more about what you're doing, do you have a website that you'd like to send them to?
Yes, well, they can actually, I would invite people to, and I'm actually going to redo it, but we have a website paying tribute to my grandfather, which I call the Inherit, which is called alexhaley.com. So I would simply invite anyone to go to the alexhaley.com website, and they'll be able to see not only obviously they'll be able to see a fuller breadth of the work that my grandfather did, his interviews, magazine articles, things like that. So I'd invite them to learn and uncover more about Roots and essentially, and if they, have questions or they'd like to, reach out to me, they actually can email me directly at roots@alexhaley.com. That's my main mailbox where I will I'll see any sort of inquiries as well. And then of course on our family on Facebook we have an Alex Haley family page as well, which not only myself but other family members will post things occasionally about their experiences and their perspectives or things that have happened with Roots as well. And as we enter the 50th and we celebrate the other aspect of our family, which is another thing we have to do, which is Queen. You'll see more activity there. So I invite them to go to those two sources, to sort of kind of get a deeper understanding of the work that my grandfather did. And we do have an Inherited Roots .com site, which is actually in development. I am redoing it for the 50th as well. But the alexhaley.com would be the place to reach me. Roots@alexhaley.com would be the place to send me any messages or inquiries.
Bill, I am grateful to have had the opportunity to celebrate the 49-year anniversary of the publishing of Roots, the story of the saga of an American family, and along with you, looking forward to being a part of this celebration. And there is just so much significance that is going to go into circling back and just reminding people about how relevant Roots is. And so, yeah, I look forward to bringing you back on this podcast as we go along, moving towards the 50th and during the 50th. And yeah, just wish you nothing but peace and prosperity. And I'm just so happy to know you. Right? To be able to tie a human being to a story that is just so fascinating, a person that I actually know, it's just wonderful. So nothing but good luck to you, Bill.
Well, thank you, Guy. I appreciate you, and I appreciate us being connected. And certainly, as we roll into that 50th year and celebrate that, I certainly look forward to being on your podcast again and just being connected with you and the things that we'll be doing to celebrate the 50th and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. Keep up the amazing work. And I want to let everyone know how much I appreciate you for tuning into the PR Connections radio show here at prconnectionsradio.com, the voice of new media. prconnectionsradio.com is where you can go to watch all the podcasts on our network. We are now up to 17 different podcasts on this network with a variety of topics for your enjoyment. So yeah, please go over to prconnectionsradio.com to check out our shows. You can also check us out on all the social media sites, and you can listen to our podcasts on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, and many other audio streaming platforms. So please go over there and check out our shows as well. I hope you are having an amazing day and look forward to coming back and getting together with you soon with another edition of the PR Connections radio show. Take care of yourselves.
PR Connections Radio thanks you for watching this podcast. Check out more episodes of this show and our others at prconnectionsradio.com.